I call the honourable member Philip Twyford.
Oh, very good choice.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to start by saying what's good about this bill. It regulates to create enforceable standards where before the old codes were not directly enforceable. It sets up a tiered enforcement scheme with infringement notices and a range of penalties. It creates compliance orders so that animal welfare inspectors can stop a person from doing something that contravenes the Act. And it enables mandatory standards for the export of live animals to be set in regulations. But in other ways, this bill is a disappointment. It fails to fix one of the big defects in the current Animal Welfare Act, and that is the provision that allows indefinite exemptions for breaches of the animal welfare obligations. In the Animal Welfare Act, codes are intended to set out standards of care and welfare. However, many of the codes contain standards that violate the Act's own welfare obligations. And even more bizarrely, the exemption clauses in the Act allow these breaches to continue for indefinite periods of time. And in my view, Mr Speaker, exemption clauses have been invoked too readily, particularly in relation to factory farming practices. It's been 14 years since the Act was passed, and I think it's fair to say that there has been incremental improvement, but too little improvement in the minimum standards for animal welfare under the 15 welfare codes now in existence. Under these codes, many farm animals suffer practices that violate the welfare obligations in the Act. That, sir, is clear. Layer hens. Layer hens continue to be kept in battery cages, confining a hen for the duration of its life in a cage with a floor smaller than an A4 sheet of paper, a sloping mesh floor, and a height of only 35 to 40 centimetres. It is a flagrant breach of the Act's welfare obligations, but the government doesn't intend to phase out battery cages until 2022. The Code of Welfare for broiler chickens disregards the welfare obligations in the Act. It allows stocking densities of 19 birds per square metre. 19 birds per square metre. There is no ability for birds to express their natural behaviours. The lighting and ventilation standards, I argue, sir, are inadequate. The code fails to address the selective breeding of non-survivor, so-called non-survivor birds that are unable to support their own weight, nor does it address the feeding of chemicals to promote rapid growth. And while, Mr Speaker, the Code of Welfare for pigs will see the use of sow crates phased out over the next year, it will still be lawful to continue using farrowing crates. I want to talk briefly about farrowing crates because I think they are perhaps the most egregious example of a breach of the Act's own welfare obligations that are currently allowed to continue indefinitely. Farrowing crates are used to house sows when they are about to give birth. They're about 2 metres long and 70 centimetres wide. They're designed to stop the sow from crushing the piglets by rolling on top of them. But the crate is so small that the sow can only stand up or lie down. And sows are kept in these cages for up to 12 weeks per year. Now, the government acknowledges that the use of farrowing crates does not meet the animal welfare obligations in the Act. That is clear. That is a fact. But they do not allow the sows to express their normal behaviour. And with the aid of the exemption clause, the government perpetuates this inhumane practice, arguing that there are no better commercially available alternatives. And this, Mr Speaker, is a triumph of commercial expediency over ethics. And in fact, the commercial argument itself doesn't even hold up. 35% of sows already give birth in alternative systems. Some are outdoor and some are indoor, but all require more space. Now, the pig industry, Mr. Speaker, admits that alternative systems can be as good or even better than the farrowing crates when it comes to productivity. And the international literature shows clearly that there is no difference in piglet mortality rates, for example in Sweden where farrowing crates are banned and in Denmark where they are used. The critical difference here is that free-range methods require more space, more land. Farrowing crates, by the very nature of them, are more intensive. They require less space and therefore they are cheaper. It comes down to money. And that is what is going on here. The government, through the inadequacies of the Animal Welfare Act, is colluding with factory farming to perpetuate inhumane and cruel practices because they are cheaper than a decent, humane alternative. Now, if we look at the bill before the House, Mr. Speaker, Section 183A, Clause 5 in the bill allows these indefinite exemptions to continue ad infinitum. Pigs could be kept in farrowing crates for decades to come. This bill, as other speakers have argued, offers a chance to end or reduce the suffering of millions of factory-farmed animals in New Zealand. And I believe as New Zealanders are ready to make a choice and say that animals should not be used to test party drugs, I believe that New Zealanders are also ready to raise the standards of animal welfare. Now, this House and the government deserves credit for finding the courage to ban sow crates. Now it needs to follow through and ban farrowing crates. There's growing revulsion at the cruelty of keeping hens in battery cages, and I believe, sir, that should be banned much sooner than 2022. And I intend to bring an SOP to the House that would close the loophole of Section 183A5 and ensure that any practice that does not meet the welfare obligations contained in the Animal Welfare Act would have to be phased out within 5 years. Mr. Speaker, animal-based agriculture contributes more than $21 billion to the economy every year. Factory-farmed animals contribute only 2.3% of that figure, but some of the inhumane practices of factory farming are a stain on the reputation of our farming sector and potentially a threat to this important industry. For the sake of brand New Zealand, we should be making ethical and humane farming practices just as much a feature of our reputation as food safety, high quality and sustainability. But this argument, above all, is about what is right. To subject sentient creatures to such misery and cruelty on an industrial scale simply in order to allow some producers to undercut their competitors on price is, in my view, unethical. It's time to remove this contradiction from our law that identifies a practice as a breach of the law and then in the same breath gives it an indefinite exemption. It is not right, it is not the Kiwi way, and it's time to change it.
I call the Honourable Member Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.